Shirone gasped, his heart still pounding in disbelief that he had just narrowly escaped death. What just happened? Did he really escape? His mind was in a mess, unable to remember any details. The engine system of the impassable bridge had been completely disabled, 0%. With all that he had just witnessed, the boy with spiky hair exclaimed in amazement. That was human-level difficulty. He had surpassed the expert level of the advanced class. Shirone was exhausted, still panting from the terrifying ordeal. He shouted, his voice a mixture of relief and panic. I thought I was dead. Everyone around him was stunned by his emotional words. Cerielle was so happy that she burst into tears, tears rolling down her cheeks. He did it. He really did it, Amy, standing in a corner, smiled gently, thinking to herself, how cool. People who overcome challenges with all their might, they never get arrogant or boastful. The crowd rushed to surround Shirone, clapping and congratulating him loudly. Everyone was excitedly celebrating the moment he had just conquered the difficult challenge, as if the whole world was sharing the joy with him. Congratulations, Shirone, you're the best, a voice rang out, filled with excitement. You were admitted directly to the 5th grade. The 6th graders must be fuming. The professors suddenly moved over, their faces still filled with shock. One of them exclaimed, Shirone actually passed? I can't believe it. Sheena, standing nearby, sighed regretfully, her voice filled with resentment. Oh my God, I missed this important moment because of Mr. Thad. Thad quickly explained, his face filled with grievance. I'll explain later. I tried my best, really. But Sheena didn't care, scowling and scolding. You can't help at all, you're useless. Thad was speechless. His heart felt like it had been stabbed, hurt beyond words. Sheena quickly regained her composure, speaking in a serious tone. Anyway, since both contestants crossed the finish line at the same time, we need to confirm the results. Headmaster, please announce who is the winner. She hesitated, her gaze turning towards Alpheus. Headmaster Alpheus stood there, his face absent-minded, as if he was lost in thought. Sheena called out again, her voice anxious. Headmaster! Thoughts flashed through Alpheus's mind. Am I so worried that my hair is turning white? He glanced at Shirone, the corners of his lips curling up into a secret smile. He thought to himself, I am truly happy, Shirone. You have shown everyone the light, the shining light of the magic family. Thad, standing to the side, quietly looked at Alpheus, his eyes filled with curiosity and anticipation. Thad stood there, a thought flashing through his mind. That title, the title given to the person who laid the foundation for the Fulton's concept, is also the person who was awarded the Golden Circle by the king. Sheena, with a worried expression, spoke softly. That day, what exactly happened? She sensed a flash of greed in the headmaster's heart, ignited by Shirone's outstanding talent. Thad stepped forward, placed his right hand on his left chest, and bowed respectfully. Headmaster, please announce the decision. I believe that the person who can shape the future of the academy has appeared. Alpheus laughed, his voice tinged with humor. Yes, I was a bit distracted. That day, I was lost in reminiscing about the past after witnessing my student's talent, he thought quietly, a feeling of jealousy creeping into his heart. I envy his innocent, pure passion for magic. Recalling that scene, Alpheus shook his head slightly. I don't believe in fate. He held the necklace in one hand, his eyes distant, still lost in thought. It's been a long time since my heart has been beating so fast. In front of all the students and professors of the academy, Principal Alpheus stepped forward, his deep voice resounding. Even if only one person was chosen, I still want to commend all the students who participated today. The courage you showed is the flame that lights up the world, bringing it closer to a bright future. And the one who passed the difficult test today is Arianne Shirone. Cheers echoed throughout the auditorium. Everyone surrounded Shirone, their eyes filled with admiration. But on his face, fatigue was evident. His eyes were blank, as if he still couldn't believe his victory. Suddenly, from the crowd, a figure slowly walked out. It was Mark, his gait heavy, his body covered in wounds from the recent ordeal. The crowd whispered, "Look, it's Mark. Don't tell me he's going to protest because he accompanied Shirone." Someone whispered, his voice filled with doubt, but the chatter quickly changed direction. This new student, he was the one who saved Mark during the trial. The conflict back then was very shady. The commotion spread, everyone's eyes turned towards Mark, waiting to see what he would do next. Mark stood there feeling increasingly uneasy, thinking to himself, how could this be? I saw it with my own eyes. He is truly a genius. Shirone, with a cold gaze, looked straight at Mark. Under the pressure, Mark lowered his head, his voice filled with remorse. All this time, I was wrong. He took a deep breath and continued sincerely. No, I apologize. Senior, as a mage, I will take full responsibility. The group of seniors standing around changed from fear to panic. They all bowed their heads, shouting loudly, "We were wrong, senior. We will accept any punishment." Shirone, despite being tired, still smiled faintly, replying, "All right, I hope everyone is sincere." They nodded in unison, saying, "Yes, yes, senior." In their hearts, everyone thought, "Oh my God, he is so scary. Luckily, we apologized early." Meanwhile, Shirone just thought to himself, "I just want to sleep. I'm so tired. My mind is not clear at all." Suddenly, Amy spoke up, her voice excited. "Great, let's go." Cerielle was surprised, turned to ask, "Wait, I think we should stay with Shirone on this special occasion." Amy shook her head and quickly replied, "There's no time," she thought to herself. "Shirone has proven himself. Now it's my turn to shine." Suddenly, Shirone turned around, his eyes looking straight at Amy. He shouted loudly, his voice filled with emotion, "Amy! Amy!" The two of them stopped in their tracks. The air seemed to freeze. Shirone raised his hand and pointed at her, his face filled with determination and fatigue. "I kept my promise, right? Even though I'm not sober right now, I'll catch up with you soon." Amy was stunned, her eyes wide open. The surrounding crowd erupted in a loud murmur, "Calling your daughter by her name like this. Oh my God, I'm so jealous of his girlfriend." Another person shouted, "That's so cool, Shirone." Amy stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks at what he had just said. But Shirone, after waking up, had no memory of that moment. The good news quickly spread. Shirone was officially promoted to 5th grade. Elsewhere, Itella was quietly searching for something, her heart filled with anxiety. She thought to herself, "Is it true? I'm sure synesthesia chased after Shirone." Worry welled up in her as she thought, "I lost him in the Dragon Labyrinth." In a luxurious academy, in a room called the Disciplinary Committee, the atmosphere became tense. A meeting was taking place, and Thad stood there, holding a report of violations, his eyes solemn. Behind him, Maria bowed her head, her voice trembling as she confessed all her mistakes, begging to be disciplined. But surprisingly, Shirone, Mark, and even Brad, the gatekeeper, who had been affected by Maria's sleeping spell, spoke up at the same time. They affirmed that they did not want Maria to be punished or suffer any consequences. Moved by that sincerity, the other students also began to stand up, admitting their own mistakes one by one. Some even mentioned things related to Shirone's test, causing the whole room to stir. Behind Mark, students stood up one after another, publicly announcing their mistakes, making the atmosphere increasingly heated. Shirone silently looked at Mark, thinking to himself, he is trying to keep his promise that he will take responsibility to the end. Suddenly, Alpheus, with a calm voice, spoke up, interrupting everyone's train of thought. Principal Alpheus looked around, his voice calm but full of authority. "I think Maria's case is an unfortunate one. She did not use that machine to harm anyone." He paused, his eyes sharp, then continued. "However, according to the Academy's regulations, disciplinary action must still be taken." Shirone suddenly stood up, put her hands on her chest, and said firmly, "Sir, I also accept disciplinary action. I ignored the signal to postpone the exam and entered the labyrinth without permission. Furthermore, I dragged Mark into such a dangerous place." Alpheus rubbed his eyes slightly, sighing as if he was lost in thought. Who would have thought that in this school I would witness such a scene? Thad, standing in a corner, thought to himself, things have gone beyond the principal's control. He looked at the students, all of whom were bowing their heads ready to accept disciplinary action. They were clouded by competition, pride, and jealousy. But now, to become dignified mages, they are bravely admitting their mistakes. Thad sighed, memories flooding back to the first time he met the headmaster. Who would have thought he would choose to teach like this? He taught me so much not only about magic, but also about people. Alpheus raised the hammer high and slammed it down on the table. A loud bang sound resounded throughout the room. The students all burst into tears. The atmosphere was heavy. Mark walked over to Maria, bowed his head, and said in a trembling voice, "I'm sorry, Maria." Sheena, standing to the side, diligently wrote down the violation list for each student. This was the first time in the history of the Academy that everyone present was punished, an unprecedented precedent. On the violation list, the information was clearly displayed. Merlang Maria, 19 years old, 7th grade, homeroom teacher, disciplinary action, 2-month suspension. Slider Mark, 15 years old, 7th grade, homeroom teacher, disciplinary action, 2-month suspension. The other students received lighter punishments, a 1-month suspension. As for Shirone, on his self-criticism sheet, it only said penalty to write a self-criticism. Principal Alpheus, his eyes were thoughtful, recalling the moment Shirone admitted his mistake. He asked, "Shirone, why did you still rush into the maze, even though you saw the postponement signal?" Shirone lowered her head, her voice low. "Teacher, at that time, all I could think about was not wanting to lose. The only thing on my mind was that I had to solve that maze." "I don't remember everything clearly either." Shayna smiled, her eyes sparkling as she looked at Shirone. "You really have a positive side that I didn't expect. Who would have thought that you would be so well behaved?" Shirone's name was clearly written on the notice. He had officially been promoted to 5th grade. It must be because he's a boy that he's getting such preferential treatment. Someone joked, causing everyone to laugh. Turning to Shirone, he was slumped in his chair, snoring from exhaustion. In his dream, a vague voice rang out, calling his name, Shirone, Shirone. Suddenly, a scream tore through the air. Dragon Labyrinth. A flash of light appeared, and Shirone found himself flying, transforming into a streak of brilliant light. Focus more, more. His eyes in the dream widened, and scrutiny from the past rushed back to him. I will erase myself. Erase myself. Memories flashed. His soul felt like it was being shredded into tiny pieces, melting away, merging into the world, as if he was already a part of this universe. Shirone continued to charge forward, regardless. I am becoming, the space around him began to crumble, pieces rapidly dissolving. He continued to move forward, not stopping, while the space collapsed more and more violently, infinitely. Shirone suddenly fell freely into the shattered space, plunging down at an uncontrollable speed, his heart filled with panic. In front of him, where the space was shattered, there was only an empty black patch. Suddenly, a piano melody rang out, pulling him out of his terrifying nightmare. Shirone woke up with a start, his heart still pounding. Piano music? Is it morning already? He hurriedly put on his uniform, straightening his tie. In his mind, he muttered, I can't remember anything. Why do I feel so uncomfortable? He picked up a notebook, suddenly realizing, that's right, this is the notebook Amy lent me. Thanks to it, I memorized the rules of magic. Shirone flipped through the pages, thinking to himself, I have to return it to the combined class today. I want to thank Amy, because she helped me to the end. Suddenly he stopped, his face full of question marks, as if he had just seen something strange. At the second combined training hall, Shirone called out loudly, Amy! Amy turned around, her face slightly worried. Cerielle, standing beside him, smiled and greeted him. Shirone, how are you? Are you okay? Shirone held a basket full of apples, smiling and handing them to Amy and Cerielle. Thank you very much. This is my thank you. Amy was surprised, raising her eyebrows. What? Apples? Shirone nodded, handing her the notebook back. I didn't mean to peek, but you seem to like apples? Amy thought to herself, her face slightly red. Like apples, I like cherries. She quickly flipped through the pages of the notebook, muttering, What is this? In the notebook, a line caught her eye. What am I thinking? It's a matter of time. What good is an apology? Sorry, apple, apple. In Korean, apple and sorry are homophones. Amy was embarrassed, her face red. She shouted, anything. Then she turned around and ran away, leaving Shirone and Cerielle bewildered. Cerielle called out, Amy, where are you going? Class is about to start. The two stood there, not understanding what had just happened. Shirone muttered, why is she like this? Cerielle shook her head and hurriedly chased after Amy. Later, Amy easily passed the advanced test and officially entered the graduating class. But it seemed that even with her genius brain, there were still problems that she could not solve. A month passed, and the 7th graders returned after their suspension. They shouted in unison, their voices filled with excitement, Senior, we saved a seat for you. Cerielle stood nearby, surprised by this scene. Shirone was embarrassed, scratching his head. You don't have to do that. He thought to himself, his voice filled with confusion. How strange, every time we have a combined class, the 7th graders fight to save a seat for me. The people around glanced at each other, as if remembering Shirone's terrifying gaze from that day. They quickly returned to their seats, not daring to hesitate. Shirone sighed, thinking to himself, I feel like I've become a terrifying senior. Suddenly a gentle voice rang out, Is there still a seat for you, Junior? Shirone immediately recognized it, turned around, and smiled. Of course, Sister Cerielle. Please sit. Cerielle sat down, winking sarcastically. Your lovely girlfriend isn't here, so you don't look energetic at all, do you? Shirone smiled wryly, replying, I'm the lonely one. Amy and I are always together. Cerielle laughed, nodding, That's right. That's also why I'm about to graduate. Shirone was startled, her eyes wide open. Oh, really? Cerielle smiled, her voice soft. I was planning to graduate and live a normal life. But after seeing you and Amy, I suddenly felt excited. I feel like my youth has been wasted a bit. Besides, it seems like Amy wants to become a soldier. Shirone was surprised, exclaiming, A soldier? You mean she wants to join the Asian war? Cerielle sighed, her voice bored. Are you two really dating? Why are you so surprised? Shirone worriedly said, her voice trembling. But wouldn't that be dangerous? Even though Thormia is quite peaceful right now, if war breaks out, Cerielle interrupted, explaining, if war really breaks out, all mages are obliged to participate. That's why we're getting so much support and benefits now. But don't worry, Amy's specialty is sniper magic, so she'll only operate in the shadows. Shirone laughed, his eyes lighting up as he imagined the scene. That sounds cool. The beautiful, charming Agent Amy. Why would I worry about a leader like her? He turned to Cerielle and nodded. Specialization is a big advantage. Thanks. He waved goodbye to her, smiling brightly. From the 5th grade, students began to think seriously about their future career as a mage. If you excelled in a certain field, it would be a big advantage. But not everyone shared this easily, especially students with low scores, because people often hesitated to mention such gaps. Suddenly, a voice rang out, interrupting Shirone's train of thought. Hey, Shirone, are you going to practice on your own again? If you have any difficulties, just ask me. It was Nade, the friendly boy with a friendly smile. Shirone smiled, feeling warm inside. Nade, he is such a great friend. Even though I am not good at talking, he always starts conversations and is always open. Although Nade's grades are only average, he possesses an all-round talent that can even control lightning. Shirone muttered, Nade's omnipotence has nothing to do with being friendly. Seeing Shirone sigh, Nade laughed loudly and patted his shoulder. You're sighing again. Why are you so down? Shirone thought to himself, everyone has their own personality. The 5th grade is different from the 7th grade. Even though they're the same age, they're much more mature than me. Suddenly, 2 voices rang out from behind, full of excitement. Hey, Shirone, listen to us. What do you 2 think? Shirone was startled, surprised that his name and Nade's were added together. Nade frowned and replied, What? A boy with neat hair spoke up, his voice resolute. I told you I can't agree. Shirone thought to himself, his mind in turmoil. What are they trying to argue about? This is terrible. Are they going to avoid me because I don't understand something? What is this? Chemistry? Biology? Or literature? Then one of the group shouted, Professor Athela and Shayna, who do you like more? Shirone was startled, his eyes wide open, his mouth wide open, his heart pounding. He thought to himself, full of embarrassment, Girl, what? Nade took a deep breath, then slowly spoke, his voice filled with doubt. What are you thinking asking that question? Shirone was startled, glanced at Nade, and thought to himself, That's right, Nade, very good. But then Nade frowned and shouted in dissatisfaction, I'm on Professor Sheena's team. Do you hear me? Shirone heard this, and his heart screamed, and he held his head in his hands as if he had just been struck by lightning. He exclaimed in his heart, Oh my God, what's this? Nade stood with his arms crossed, aggressively questioning the other 2. Don't you know that Professor Sheena is the type of person who is both beautiful and wise, huh? The person standing opposite him refused to give up and immediately raised his voice to refute. No, Professor Athela is the one who gives off the feeling of wanting to be protected. Shirone stood to the side, his face troubled, watching the 3 people bickering. He thought to himself, those underage boys really are. Suddenly, a voice unexpectedly turned towards him. Shirone, what do you think? Shirone was startled, his mouth agape, thinking to himself, what do I think? Being asked so suddenly. He was flustered, his mind spinning. That's right, to have a happy school life, I need to learn how to get along with everyone. With 3 pairs of cold eyes staring at him, Shirone was flustered, sweat beading on his forehead. He thought to himself, but both professors are people I respect. Choosing one is a bit difficult. Thinking this, Shirone clenched his fists, took a deep breath, and resolutely spoke. For me. But before he could finish his sentence, he suddenly stopped, bewildered. The 2 people who had been full of murderous intent and interrogated him nonstop suddenly stepped back, reserved, looking embarrassed. They greeted him awkwardly, then mumbled, sorry, we'll be back later, the other 2 mumbled, then hurriedly ran away. Shirone stood there, frozen like a statue, silently crying, Is it because I can't answer? Nade, who was standing behind him, suddenly looked away as if he had just seen someone. He raised his hand, loudly saying, No, it's because of him. Then he turned and shouted, Hey, Eruki. Nade's cold gaze swept over the crowd. Eruki walked over, one hand stroking his chin, the other in his pocket, slowly approaching, pretending to be innocent. What are you guys talking about so excitedly? Nade sighed, smiled bitterly, just like usual, arguing about which professor is better or something. He shook his head, then continued, They're not kids anymore, so let's not dig deeper. Then Nade raised his hand, introducing, Shirone, this is Eruki. Shirone, standing behind Nade, heard his name mentioned and secretly exclaimed in his heart, Eruki? Who is he that makes everyone change their attitudes so quickly? Shirone said awkwardly, Hello. Nade smiled and continued, This is the first time you 2 have met, right? This Eruki is the weirdo from class 5. Hearing the introduction, Eruki extended his hand, his eyes sharp and cold as he looked at Shirone, saying, Nice to meet you, Arianne Shirone. I've heard of you for a long time. Actually, who in this school doesn't know you? Shirone was bewildered, shaking Eruki's hand while looking at his hand, wondering, This voice sounds familiar. Suddenly, a vague memory flooded back. A voice, An unclear face rang out in his mind. Don't hesitate. If you want to do something, just do it. The voice continued to ring in his ears. You came here to become a magician, didn't you? Shirone stood still, confused, wondering, who? Who is that person? Shirone was delighted, tightly holding Eruki's hand with both hands, shouting, You! Thank you! Thanks to you, I was able to successfully use that redirection. Eruki was a little surprised, looking down at his tightly held hand, but did not respond. Shirone continued enthusiastically, Thank you very much for last time. After a moment of silence, Nade looked at Shirone, sneered. You really are the boring type, aren't you? Shirone froze, blankly exclaimed, Yeah? Nade quickly interrupted, separating the two, smiling and explaining, Don't mind it. Eruki always talks like that. Then he turned to Eruki, raised his hands in front of his chest, and reprimanded, Hey, what are you talking about? Eruki scratched his head, looking innocent, calmly replied, What? That was a compliment. Eruki stepped forward, turned around, glanced at Shirone and Nade, raised his hand to eye level, and smiled sarcastically. Anyway, do your best. The 5th grade class is full of weirdos. Be careful. Nade quickly spoke up, calling out, Where are you going, Eruki? What about class? Eruki just turned his head, walked straight, leaving behind 3 cold words, Don't mind. Shirone was stunned, secretly exclaiming, He doesn't mind attending magic class? Seeing Eruki had gone far away, Nade turned to Shirone, scratched his head, and sighed with a bored expression. Sorry, he's always like that. But once you get used to it, you'll see that Eruki is also a good guy. Shirone looked at Nade, his voice filled with curiosity. Is there anything strange about him? Nade smiled bitterly and replied, Yes, if you want to understand him well, it's very tiring. Honestly, Eruki is also a genius. Nade hesitated, his voice filled with mystery, but the problem is that he is a genius in a strange field. Shirone widened his eyes, surprised, and asked, Eruki is a genius. Suddenly, from somewhere, there was a loud murmur of discussion. Hey, look, it's Eruki. Why is he entering the shadow abyss again? On the high platform in front, Eruki was walking confidently, heading somewhere. The crowd below was bustling, jostling to look up. A sarcastic voice rang out, Come on, he wouldn't just take off his clothes and lie there, would he? Shirone was stunned, wondering, Take off his clothes? What is this? Nade stood beside him, slapped his forehead, and shouted in panic, Oh my God, what is he going to do next? Let's go take a look. At this moment, on the high platform, below Eruki's feet, currents of wind began to swirl around his legs. A sparkling magic circle appeared, surrounding his body, emitting a mysterious light. From where Eruki stood, a sudden burst of energy burst forth, spreading out all around him. Under his feet, magical circles were spinning brightly, emitting a mysterious light. Eruki stood tall, one hand in his pocket, his sharp eyes following a stream of green energy that shot from the ground, shooting straight up into the sky. Shirone and the other students stood below, mouths agape, staring blankly at the green energy. Shirone wondered silently, Then he suddenly realized, thinking to himself, redirecting spiritual energy? The speed is terrifying. That green energy has now formed a giant rotating circle, round like a halo above everyone's heads. Some students looked terrified, their eyes glued to the scene. Suddenly, a voice rang out, full of admiration. Every time I see it, I find it so fascinating. Another voice added, Surely no one in this kingdom can do that. Eruki chuckled lightly, snapping his fingers. Immediately, 8 medium-sized blue circles appeared on the ceiling, floating mysteriously. The crowd looked up, and a commotion arose. What is that? Is it an attack? The teacher who was teaching the 4th grade heard the noise, turned her head, and exclaimed in surprise. She shouted loudly, Eruki, stop right now. On the ceiling, 2 small wings grew out of the blue circles and began to move. In the center of each circle, a smaller circle looked like an eye, shining strangely. Eruki put his thumb and index finger together, his cold eyes shining with a blue light. He softly said, Tai. A voice rang out, warning repeatedly, Everyone, dodge! The whole group of students panicked, jostling to find a way to escape, shouting in unison, Hey, you crazy. In the chaos, no one noticed that a sword had suddenly pierced through a blue eye on the ceiling. It flashed brightly, causing everyone to panic even more. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rang out. Purple smoke and dazzling light enveloped the whole group. The whole group screamed until their throats were hoarse, extremely frightened by the scene. Shirone stood tall, not running away, letting the purple smoke blow his hair. Eruki's laughter rang out. As he spoke, he raised his hand to eye level, glancing at Shirone. See you later, Shirone. With that, he disappeared into the white-purple smoke. Suddenly, the teacher rushed over, grabbed Eruki's ear, and shouted angrily, dragging him away. You little brat! The last suspension was over not long ago, and now you're causing trouble again? Eruki grimaced, painfully leaning into her hand, explaining, I didn't destroy the machine. I know I didn't do it. The teacher glared and shouted, I was suspended for 3 days, remember? Eruki didn't show any surprise, as if this was all too familiar. He muttered, for so long, all around, there were only whispers about Eruki. He's the weirdest kid in class 5. Eruki's current image is both noble and unapproachable. Eruki sat cross-legged on the table, his hands behind his head, his eyes staring straight ahead. The voice continued, his communication skills are terrible, and his personality is probably just average. But the reason Eruki is called a genius is because he only focuses on one area. The person continued. During the midterms, he received 0 points in all of his social studies. But his science subjects, they all got a perfect 100 points. The voice became deep and mysterious. There is a disease called Savant Syndrome. It is a phenomenon where a person, after recovering from brain damage, suddenly possesses abilities that far surpass those of ordinary people. Then the voice emphasized, specifically, Eruki is the king of science. His nervous system seems to be glowing with exploding neurons. For example, he can accurately calculate what will happen in extreme environments, such as temperatures below 0 or above 100 degrees, in the blink of an eye. He could even calculate the date 40,000 years from now if he wanted to. It's no exaggeration to say that if he wanted to, Eruki could count pi for the rest of his life. Her voice was filled with admiration, but then she suddenly stopped. Suddenly, the literature professor, her face red with anger, raised the test paper high and shouted, Eruki! Are you looking down on the professor's authority? How ridiculous. You turned the literature test into a math problem. She pointed at the test paper, her voice trembling. Specifically in question 2, the question asked to explain the meaning of the line, the leaves are falling down by the poet Gilberto. And what did you write? That the velocity on the surface of the leaf is subject to air resistance, so it moves strongly in the direction of the total force vector. You even drew a model equation for the surface of the leaf and solved a series of math equations in the literature test. The literature professor was furious, slamming his hand on the table, shouting, this is a literature test, not math. Eruki sat there, calmly looking at his test paper being enlarged on the big screen by the professor. The teacher, her face red, continued to shout, it seems like you want to prove that you are a genius, huh? But there are things you can't explain with math. For example, a profound image or human emotion. Eruki, not caring at all, picked his ear with his little finger, looking bored. He replied in a nonchalant tone, Professor, there is nothing I can't explain with numbers. Then he glanced at the teacher, continuing, if the world can't be explained with logic, how can we live in such a scary world? After saying that, Eruki pointed his index finger at the side of his nose, smiling mockingly. The professor's face seemed about to explode, red with anger. Eruki crossed her arms, looked away, and continued calmly. For example, an angry face is just a manifestation of chemical reactions in your body. Emotional imbalance. Nerves tense due to stress. Blood pressure fluctuates. When that happens, blood vessels dilate. Your face turns dark red. On the contrary, if the blood vessels contract, they will appear and turn blue. The professor was speechless, his eyes blazing with anger. She gritted her teeth, her face red as a demon, and growled, go away, go away. Her voice echoed throughout the building. Go away. You get 0 points, 0 points, 0 points. Understand? Shirone stood there, bewildered, and exclaimed, this is amazing. He can speak about the things he believes in so confidently. Shirone shook his head, still in shock. I can't believe he's the same age as me. There are all kinds of people in this world. Nade sat opposite, propping his chin up, looking troubled. Before, the professors actively encouraged Eruki, but then everyone gave up. He changed his position, crossed his legs, propped his chin up, and said cheerfully, but who would have thought he would be curious about you? What a surprise. By the way, I'm glad you started talking to me. Shirone smiled wryly. I understand. But in his heart, he thought to himself, even so, I'm still a little worried. He put his hand to his mouth, thinking seriously, anyway, Nade is really knowledgeable. While he was thinking, a gentle voice sounded beside him. Yeah, sorry. Both Shirone and Nade were startled, turning their heads. A long-haired girl with an embarrassed expression was looking at Shirone, hesitantly speaking. The girl shyly looked at Shirone and said, Shirone, do you want to join our research group? Nade was surprised and softly called out, Shirone. The girl continued, her voice filled with enthusiasm. We are researching matter transfer magic. If someone as good at photon magic as you joins, the research will be completed very quickly. Besides, if you submit your research paper, you won't have to waste time doing performance evaluations during the break. The rest of the time, we can study together. Shirone was embarrassed when he heard this and replied, sorry, my study results aren't very good right now. Nade, I think I need to focus on improving first. He hesitated and continued, Sorry for refusing. The girl smiled lightly, her voice gentle. It's okay. We can't force you. If you change your mind, just let me know. The girl turned back to the group of friends, turned around and said to Shirone, if you change your mind, you can join anytime. Shirone, who was sitting at the other table, turned around, smiling. Okay, thank you. Nade also looked at them, smiling brightly. After the group left, Nade looked back, laughed gleefully, and said, how embarrassing. That research group is really outstanding. Shirone glared at him and replied, well, I already have Senior Amy. That group isn't that outstanding, right? Nade burst out laughing and sarcastically said, what's the connection between those two things? Shirone was speechless, thinking to himself, unfortunately, my knowledge is still lacking. He uneasily recalled his low score on the midterm exam. It's already hard enough to raise my score. I can't even dream about joining the research group. Hearing this, Nade curled his lips and sarcastically said, oh, I'm so jealous of you. Shirone changed the subject and asked, Nade, aren't you in any research groups? With your abilities, I think you can join a good group. Nade smiled and replied, me, I already have a research group. Shirone was surprised and exclaimed, really? Nade nodded and continued excitedly, and I'm also the group leader. Shirone heard this and felt a little disappointed. He sighed and lowered his head and sat still. Nade saw this and waved his hand awkwardly, quickly comforting him. No, it's not a big group. You're embarrassing me. Our group only has 2 members, and the funding has been cut off. Nade raised his voice and deliberately explained, all the seniors in the group have graduated, so I was promoted to be the group leader. Shirone nodded and exclaimed, the graduating class. So the graduating students were also in that group? Suddenly, his eyes lit up, as if he had just thought of something important. Shirone thought to himself, if the research team had any graduates participating, it must be a very promising team. He turned to Nade and asked, if you don't mind, can I visit your research lab? Outside the strange forest, Nade's voice rang out, Shirone, I thought you weren't interested in research? Shirone replied, his voice sincere, no, I am interested, but I'm afraid that joining would bother everyone. Nade was surprised and exclaimed, what? The research team isn't that rigid. We're just playing and studying. We're here, our research lab. Nade led Shirone to a dark, strangely shaped place that seemed to swallow only light. Shirone was surprised and exclaimed, what is this? Nade smiled and introduced, this is the Matut Istas storage room, which contains all the training facilities for the students. In front of a giant black cube with a large gap in the middle, standing alone in the forest, Shirone and Nade looked as small as 2 ants. Nade continued excitedly, this is a super advanced storage room. You can put your school supplies in one cube and it will automatically send them to the room you need. Shirone sighed, his voice slightly desperate. Ah, so this is just a storage room? Nade saw his expression and quickly waved his hand to explain, wait. Although it looks like this, the inside is amazing. You will be surprised. The 2 of them walked into the laboratory. Nade walked ahead, proudly introducing, this is a precious place that my seniors have devoted their hearts to preserving. Shirone was curious. Really? Then he smiled and continued, then can I look forward to it? Nade nodded firmly. Of course. Nade continued excitedly, you will be surprised at what's inside. Suddenly, the image of a hand holding a piece of chalk quickly gliding across the blackboard appeared, accompanied by clacking sounds. The 2 of them walked and chatted. Nade shouldered his bag, looked at Shirone and smiled. Other groups are all coveting this place. My seniors fought hard to keep ownership of it. Shirone walked past another passage, stopped and asked curiously, this is... Nade turned his head, grinned. To be honest, we can use everything in here if we want. Shirone was surprised. Isn't that against the rules? Nade looked at him and replied, every time you find the item you want, the structure of this place will automatically change. Having said that, Nade stopped, walked deeper inside, leaving Shirone with a curious gaze. Shirone walked along the long yellow line where the 7H symbol was clearly visible. Nade walked ahead, one hand on his shoulder, the other in his pocket, smiling confidently, no one can find us here. Shirone was surprised as he followed. He looked at Nade thinking, a hiding place where no one can find me? Nade turned around, smiled brightly and pointed, this is our research lab. Shirone was stunned, speechless, only opening his mouth in surprise. The 2 of them stood in front of an old sign hanging on the door, on which was written, Psychic Science Research Lab. Shirone exclaimed, his voice filled with astonishment. Psychic science? He was stunned, thinking, psychic? In a magic academy? Meanwhile, Nade was still as excited as before, not paying any attention to Shirone's stunned expression. Nade turned to Shirone, his eyes shining, and asked, what do you think? Cool, right? Then he continued excitedly, his voice full of excitement. Ghosts? Spirits, reincarnation, aliens, hell, God, that kind of thing. We study everything related to those things. Shirone stood behind him, his face pale, his body trembling. He thought to himself, doubting himself, I think I joined the wrong group. It's not that I'm not interested at all, but this is a bit too much. Suddenly, a door opened, tearing the silence apart. Immediately after, a loud but harmless explosion rang out, and the wind from the explosion blew Shirone's hair and clothes away. He was startled and shouted, "What is this?" Nade smiled, amused. "It's just a little dust. You'll get used to it soon." Shirone coughed, covered her mouth with her hand, and glared at Nade, thinking, why do I have to get used to this instead of cleaning it up? Shirone was stunned, her eyes widening as she saw the scene before her. In front of her, a figure was writing diligently on the board. It turned out to be Eruki, concentrating on solving some kind of problem. Shirone spoke up, surprised. "Eruki?" Nade tilted his head, looked at Shirone, and leisurely said, "Our research group is quite famous, but we can't reveal all the members yet. That's why I didn't tell you before." Shirone frowned, puzzled. "Eruki is also interested in supernatural phenomena?" Nade laughed, explaining, "On the contrary, he joined to prove the opposite, that everything supernatural can be explained. This is also the ideal place to attract people who want to explain the world with their rational brains." Suddenly, Eruki, as if he had detected the presence of the two people, turned around. His eyes lit up, and he shouted happily, "Huh, is that Shirone?" He ran over, grabbed Shirone's hands tightly, and said excitedly, "You came just in time." Eruki smiled brightly, his eyes sparkling. "What wind brought a genius like you to this lowly place? You're great to be here. Listen, here are some things I just discovered." Shirone was embarrassed and hummed in response. Eruki, not paying attention, continued excitedly. "When matter is decomposed, what remains are atoms, right? Right?" Still keeping an excited expression, he continued, "But I think even atoms can be decomposed into even smaller particles. If you do that, what do you think the atoms will be made of?" Shirone hesitated, confused by the unexpected question. He thought for a moment, then replied, Well, I'm not sure, but I think it might be some kind of hidden, latent energy." After hearing this, Eruki's eyes lit up, and he grabbed Shirone's hand and shook it up and down. "That's right, I knew it. You're such an amazing person. I can't believe you thought that far ahead." Shirone broke out in a cold sweat, thinking to himself, Am I serious? Eruki, still beaming, continued, "Yes, there is a huge amount of latent energy. There is enough energy to destroy an entire city." He raised his eyebrows and asked, "What do you think will happen?" Shirone was confused by the question and exclaimed in surprise, "What?" Then he became serious and hesitant. "Everyone will get hurt." Hearing this, Eruki picked his nose with his little finger and said coldly, "What are you talking about?" Then he pointed his finger straight at Shirone, looking like a madman, and shouted, "There is a ton of latent energy inside. Do you think we need to worry about that?" Shirone frowned and exclaimed in surprise, "What? Do you understand what I'm saying?" Shirone shouted, his voice filled with indignation. "The principle taught us that, as a magician, we must think about the consequences that magic can cause in this world." Nade stood behind, looking at the two people tensely, not knowing how to handle it. The more Shirone spoke, the more he shouted, "So you think sacrificing the majority to satisfy your own desires is acceptable?" Eruki, calmly picking up the stem of the cherry from the cup, coldly replied, "You are really too boring." Shirone was stunned, only exclaiming, "Ah." Eruki held the cherry up to eye level, looked at Shirone, curled his lips, and continued, "Do you think other magicians don't know this? They know it too, but they don't do it because they don't have the ability. That's why they stop." Then he put the cherry in his mouth, chewed slowly, and said, "Your supreme intelligence, it was given to accomplish something." Shirone was furious, shouting at Eruki, "Whether we are geniuses or not, it doesn't matter. Rather than being a genius who harms others, I'd rather be a harmless fool." Eruki, who was chewing slowly with a cherry in his mouth, glanced down at Shirone and said jokingly, "A group of geniuses leads the masses of fools. History has proven that, and that's the world we live in." I hate to use idealism, but it's the truth. Shirone's face turned serious, his eyes glaring. "No, your logic is full of failure. You can easily satisfy that ideal, but it's not worth it." Nade, who was standing in the middle of the line, was sweating profusely, raised both hands in the air, waving them around, trying to interject to ease the tense atmosphere. Come on. You two, calm down." Shirone glared at Eruki, who was folding his arms, looking away, rubbing the tip of his nose. Nade lowered his voice and advised, "Come on, this kind of emotional argument isn't any good, right? Sit down, have some cake, and drink some water." Shirone, feeling that he couldn't stay any longer, turned around, picked up his bag, and walked straight to the door. He said, his voice resolute, "I have nothing more to say here. Goodbye, Nade. I'm leaving." Nade panicked, reaching out to call out, "Wait, Shirone, do you know where to go?" Eruki, still rubbing his nose, calmly said, "Just follow the way you came in. If you can't do it, you're a complete idiot." Nade was furious, turned around and shouted, "Hey, Eruki, why did you say that?" Nade glared at Eruki, blaming him. "If it were you, you should have been able to explain it to Shirone so that he could understand, right?" Eruki slumped down in the chair, crossed his arms, and replied, "Ah, I admit I went a bit too far." Then he put his right leg on his thigh and sneered, "But he is my rival." Nade was stunned, his voice puzzled. "You did that on purpose? Besides, who would have thought you would say the word rival when to you this world is just numbers?" Eruki brushed his hair back, tilted his neck back, and looked at Nade arrogantly. "It's because I only care about numbers that I noticed, Shirone. You saw him in the promotion test, right?" Nade was surprised and nodded. "The A transfer test? Of course I remember. Thanks to that, Shirone was evaluated on par with us." Eruki glanced at the ceiling, his voice deep in thought. "For those who are new to teleportation magic, do you know how fast you need to think to pass level 10, especially the Dragon Labyrinth?" Nade was speechless, his face tense, staring at Eruki. He continued in a low voice, "It is impossible to pass it without dividing the time." In that moment, Shirone performed. Eruki paused, his voice low. 10,000 calculations per second. In Eruki's mind, the image of Shirone's brain working at a dizzying speed, connecting with the spiritual realms, appeared clearly. After hearing this, Nade exclaimed in surprise, 10,000 calculations per second? Eruki suddenly lowered his head, laughed like a madman, and shouted, "That is the mystery of insight." Eruki continued, his voice filled with excitement. "Faster than effort, more accurate than knowledge. No amount of conscious calculation can beat the speed of the unconscious." Then he suddenly calmed down, looked at Nade with a cold gaze, and asked, "What about you, Nade?" Nade frowned, then grinned, and replied, "I see. A battle between calculation and insight, right? And you want to test it through that test, right?" As he spoke, he recalled Shirone's resolute appearance when he left earlier. The next day, the sound of chatter echoed from the spacious student building. "The speed test is in 2 weeks, right? If I get a failing score this time, I probably won't be able to advance." Inside the classroom where the chatter came from, class had just ended. Shirone was standing there packing his school bag on the table, and his ears accidentally heard those chatter. "But you weren't looking forward to it?" a voice called out. "What?" Then they suddenly mentioned Shirone. Shirone, who was lining up, paused, his ears perking up. The voice continued, "He's good at practicals, right? I wonder how many points he'll get." Shirone couldn't help but feel nervous as he listened to them. He thought to himself, the speed test. In the speed test, students used active magic, aiming at targets to score points. Active magic is a term used to refer to magic that affects objects other than the caster. Even if it's not an attack, recovery, or support type, anyone can participate. Candidates must take down all the targets in each stage to advance to the next stage. The test has 3 stages, 1, 2, and 3, with the targets being 1, 1, and 2 respectively. Fast and accurate aiming is the key to success. Shirone sat upright on the chair, holding a cup of tea in both hands, her voice filled with surprise and worry. "Professor, I still can't control my active magic. If that's the case, how can I participate in the speed test?" The professor, Oliver Shina, the homeroom teacher of the 5th grade class and also Shirone's teacher, sat across from her, holding a cup of tea, smiling. She replied, "To use omniscient magic, you need to score at least 60 points on the 4-digit scoreboard. 4, 1, 4, 0, 4, 1, 4. But it seems like your chemistry score is increasing the fastest. It's commendable." Shirone looked at her pleading, "Professor." Through the window, one could see Sheena's office, where the two of them were sitting across from each other. Sheena continued to encourage, her voice gentle. "I'm not teasing you. You've mastered this subject completely, right?" Shirone hunched over, confused, as Shayna continued, "I can optimize all my knowledge. And there's one more thing, right? A piece of knowledge that only experts can understand." Shirone was surprised, then exclaimed in his mind in amazement, "Wait, you mean photon decomposition theory?" He thought to himself, teleportation magic is a variation of photon decomposition theory, a passive magic that can decompose the user's body into photons. Thinking back, the time period was so short, I didn't feel like it was passive magic, so it's not something too advanced for me. He remembered that passive magic was a type of magic that had no time limit for a mage. After recalling, Shirone looked at Sheena in amazement and said, "I didn't know we could apply photon decomposition theory to active magic." Sheena turned to look for something and said, "Recently, magic like this has been registered at the association." Shirone leaned over and wondered, "Photon magic? I hope it's cool." He recalled the image of Amy shining brightly when she used her spirit domain. Shina handed him a document and said, "Take a look." Shirone took it, his heart pounding, thinking, This is his first active magic." He carefully flipped through the pages of the magic journal. On an important page, he saw the words, "New discovery of photon decomposition theory, photon output." Below the picture were more detailed information. The researcher described photon output, as the name suggests, is a magic that produces light. The user can detect people around them using photon output. However, this method is less effective than light magic and still needs more research. Shirone held the magic journal, eyes wide, wondering, "Professor, are you sure you introduced this magic to me correctly? I can take the exam, but I'm not sure I can use this magic." Sheena lifted her teacup, closed her eyes, and smiled gently. On the surface, it seems useless. But the idea of using photon output is extremely creative. She took a sip of tea and continued, "Light is the fastest thing in this world." A Z-shaped golden light flashed in her mind. Linear lines have the advantage of being easy to control. In the ivory tower, which is at the forefront of magic optimization, it is predicted that photon output will be a major step forward in information transmission and communication in the future. The image of a tall skyscraper loomed, piercing through the white clouds behind her. Sheena smiled and continued, "It's being researched in many magical techniques that we don't know about yet. If they study it thoroughly and steadily, it will open up a great field of magic when you graduate, with great potential." Shirone rested his chin on his hand, looking at the book, deep in thought. Then he looked up and replied, "I understand, Professor. It wouldn't be bad if I mastered this skill before that happens. I'll do as you say." He thought to himself, magic leads to a new field. Maybe it will be interesting to learn. Now, Shirone was in another space, in the dense forest. He raised one hand in the air, but nothing happened. Shirone was surprised and exclaimed, "Huh?" Then he muttered, raising both hands in front of him, waving them up and down, "Why isn't it working?" Shirone held the document Sheena gave him in one hand, and with the other hand, he raised his palm, looked at it, and exclaimed in surprise, "Are you kidding? I can't control it at my current level yet?" He was in a corner of the 30-second practice area, a large area at the foot of a mountain, surrounded by forest and hills. Near the edge of the area was a large stage, where the 5th level practical class students were gathered. A student raised his hand in the air silently saying, "Initiating magic." Initiating magic is the initial action to cast magic. Shirone thought to himself, of course magic doesn't come from the hand, but from the spirit realm. But imagining photons coming from the hand makes it easier to cast. He nervously raised both hands, stared, and continued to think, "Can I do it?" Shirone muttered, "Creating photons isn't simple at all. Is it because my spiritual domain is a convergence type? It's similar to a spell." Suddenly, a female voice rang out, gentle but clear. "Nice to meet you all." It was Professor Athela. She stepped out onto the stage, smiling, saying, "Let's start the lesson." The students below were startled, their mouths gaping, shouting in unison, "You, who are you?" Professor Athela's outfit was completely different from usual. Her familiar glasses had disappeared. She took them off, clapped her hands lightly, and smiled gently at everyone. Shirone was surprised, exclaiming, "Oh my God, your outfit is so beautiful." A male student standing behind him, his index finger touching his chin, closed his eyes and speculated, "You must have just come back from training." Shirone turned around curious. "Training? When? Where?" The male student continued, his voice firm. "That's right, Professor Athela is the bishop of the Karsus Church." Shirone looked at him full of doubt. "Bishop? You mean Miss Athela is a priest?" Another male student standing behind him interjected, "That's right. A bishop is a high-ranking position, protecting the 12 holy temples." He further explained, "There are only 12 bishops on the entire continent. Miss Athela, dressed as a bishop, exudes an aura that not everyone has." The first male student's voice rang out, full of pride, "And Miss Athela is one of them, possessing unyielding mental strength. She was given the title of Jonas by the kingdom, the title given to the mage with the strongest mental strength." After speaking, he triumphantly turned towards the arena, loudly saying, "Understand? Despite her appearance, Professor Athela is..." Immediately, the two words "enchanted" appeared above Nade's head. He looked at Athela with a mesmerizing gaze, clasped his hands together, and exclaimed in admiration, "From today on, I officially join Professor Athela's team." Then he covered his face, twisted his body, and his eyes lit up with a rosy pink color. "I will study hard. Long live the study. Long live the test." The two male students beside him looked at Nade, speechless. Shirone was speechless, looking away, his face blank, thinking to himself, "Awesome! I didn't expect to learn magic from such a talented professor." Athela, standing on the field, happily clasped her hands and shouted, "Are you guys ready for the speed test?" The crowd below shouted in unison, "Yes." She smiled and continued, "Before the test, each class will have a practice session like today." The students excitedly replied, "Yes." Athela stood solemnly, smiling brightly, and began to explain the content of today's lesson. Athela excitedly announced, "Today, we will learn a technique to enhance your omnipotence. I have invited a senior from the graduating class to assist us." The students immediately became excited, chatting animatedly. "What? The real graduating class? Where? Athela's voice echoed, full of enthusiasm. "Welcome, Master Kodadama Sanayun." She explained, "Koto means words. Dama means spirit or soul. Sanyun," her shoulders relaxed, stepped forward and said, "Hello, fifth grade class." He placed his hand on his right shoulder, bowed his head, and continued, "I have come here at the invitation of the respected Professor Athela. Although this place is unfamiliar to me, I hope I can be of some help to you. I am very willing." The female students were excited, cheering continuously. While Sanyun stood with her head bowed, Athela clasped her hands in front of her chest and instructed, "Sanyun's signature magic is Kotodama, which is closely related to today's lesson. So please pay attention and concentrate." The two male students standing in front of Shirone and Nade showed obvious jealousy. The one on the left growled, "What a graduate!" The one on the right clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. "He's not even on the same level as us." Nade and Shirone stood behind them, their faces full of disdain. Nade spoke up, his voice full of sarcasm. "Since when was he on the same level as you guys?" On the podium, Sanyun looked down at the crowd gathered below and said loudly, "Kotodama magic uses the power of words to increase magic power. Instead of explaining it at length, it's easier to imagine it when you see it with your own eyes." He stretched out his two hands straight in front of him, his blue eyes slightly raised, and declared, "First, I'll show you the common dragon wind scroll magic." From the spiritual field emitted from his palm, a blue stream of air swirled, forming a lively, rotating sphere. Shirone was astonished, thinking to himself, "Oh my God, that magic is exactly like the one the principal showed me when I was little." Sanyun suddenly shouted loudly, "Dragon wind!" Immediately, a towering tornado came out of nowhere, blowing everyone's hair. The center of the tornado was where he stood, standing tall and motionless. After a while, the tornado calmed down. The crowd was frightened, whispering, "You scared me to death. This is not an easy one." Sanyun calmly closed his eyes, holding the notebook in his hand, and continued, "Remember the power of the spell just now. Now, I will increase its magic power with Kotodama." He opened his mouth, his voice deep and resounding, "Earth, mother of Gia." Then he opened his blue eyes, looked at the small notebook, and read aloud, "I ask for your power. Please take my hand. Look from the high sky, stretching forever. The sacred temple, my heart holds it. The spirit of the mage permeates the earth and sky, singing a high song, praising and glorifying. Let the ashes burn. Gather the wind to form a storm." Sanyun recited this far, his voice resounding, making everyone stunned by his charm. A female student looked at him, her eyes filled with admiration, muttering, "It sounds like a real mantra. His voice is so beautiful." 3 minutes later, Sanyun continued to recite the mantra, her voice rising and falling. "Soul and body united, we call upon the name of the master who is not afraid of the wild power of the mighty lion. Together with the ocean carrying the passionate sunlight, together with the earth containing the wind blowing for hundreds of millions of years, we will devote ourselves infinitely towards the infinite respect." But the crowd began to yawn. Many people fell asleep after 3 minutes of listening to the mantra. Some tired students groaned, "When will the chanting end? Don't sleep." Sanyun, his face solemn, the corners of his eyes slightly raised, shouted loudly, "Dragon wind!" Immediately, a tornado erupted from his feet, rolling straight up into the sky, startling everyone awake. The tornado erupted with terrifying force, as if it wanted to blow away the entire crowd, including Shirone. Everyone screamed in panic, "Help me!" They fell back and forth, dragged by the tornado's suction force, looking like fragile strands of hair in the wind. Some exclaimed, their voices trembling, "I thought I was going to fly away." Athela, standing on the stage, smiled and said, "You didn't read my incantation out loud, but you still chanted it in your mind." Sanyun's voice echoed, full of pride, "Of course I didn't just read it. I put my will into each word and treasured it." He held up a small notebook and continued, "There are countless different incantations in here. That is what increases magical power, the basic principle of Kotodama magic." Sanyun closed her eyes, calmly holding the notebook, and declared, "However, such a long incantation cannot be used in combat. Therefore, I will now show you something called the speed magic." The crowd heard Sanyun say that and exclaimed in alarm, "Again?" But Sanyun did not read any more long sentences. He used his thumb and index finger to close the small book softly. "The Earth Mother of Gia." Then he raised his face to the sky, opened his mouth wide, and shouted, "Give it to me." Immediately after, the incantations poured out as fast as lightning, so long and intense that no one could hear clearly. The wind blew harder and harder. Everyone's hair flew wildly, as if it wanted to leave their heads. The crowd was terrified, their eyes wide open, clinging to each other to avoid being swept away. Sanyun kept reading, his tongue moving continuously, so fast that it was hard to tell what he said. One hand held the book, the other hand raised high to the sky. He opened his mouth, his hair flying in the fierce wind. His blue eyes flashed, showing blood vessels. He shouted, "Dragon wind, wind." After the 3 words, "dragon wind," a fierce wind burst out from the ground, shooting straight up into the blue sky. Even if standing 10,000 miles away, anyone could see the giant wind column. All around, the strong wind swirled into a tornado, blowing away the dense foliage of the entire vast forest. Othella's voice suddenly rang out, radiant. "All right, have you seen the demonstration from Senior?" But no one responded. All the students were knocked down by the dragon wind technique, lying scattered on the ground. Shirone, one hand on the ground, struggled to stand up, the other hand brushing his hair, eyes half closed, thinking, "This power is unbelievable. Is this the level of the graduating class?" He continued to ponder. "A high school graduate mage is unofficially called a level 10 mage." Othella stood there, clasped her hands, turned to Sanyun, and smiled brightly. "Thank you, Sanyun." Sanyun bowed her head and replied, "Call me if you need anything." Shirone looked at them and thought, "I can't imagine how powerful a true 6th level mage like Othella Sensei is." So this is what this world is like. The surrounding students, some were already sitting up, while others were still lying on the ground. A student in the far corner, trembling, tried to raise his hand and said awkwardly, Professor, do we have to practice Kodadama magic?" Othella, standing on the podium, looked down and smiled. "Kodadama magic is a specialized subject, so you don't need to practice it." Hearing this, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. But then she spoke sternly and continued, "Instead, the technique you will be practicing is counting. Counting increases your omnipotence by converging spiritual energy while counting." Shirone raised her hand and asked seriously, "So the more you count, the stronger you become?" The other students were stunned. A male student asked, "Why numbers, teacher?" Othella smiled and explained, "Numbers are symbols that follow a pattern, so they are compatible with our spiritual domain." As soon as she finished speaking, her eyes turned a brilliant blue. Behind her, a blue plate like a glass appeared with the words, 10-meter radius shadow field. She continued, "Of course, you guys aren't just counting. Like Kodadama magic, you guys attach a certain meaning to the numbers. I'll demonstrate it." She further explained, "Rules are the most basic system of propositions used in logic and mathematics." At this moment, the space around Othella was surrounded by a 10-meter radius shadow field. She stood inside, smiling, and announced, "I will open the spiritual domain with the JZ technique." Othella closed her eyes and started counting 100. The 10-meter radius shadow suddenly expanded wider than before. The students below were in an uproar, discussing, "Professor, did you just count 100? Did you count from 1 to 100? Another voice sounded in surprise. "Your spirit domain has expanded. The 10-meter radius shadow domain has now become 12 meters. Othella continued, her voice even 400, 1,100. The shadow domain continued to expand with each number she counted. She counted to 1,700, then 2,400. Shirone was shocked, raised her hand to cover her face, and thought to herself, "Impossible. How could a normal person count so quickly?" The shadow domain continued to expand. Shirone was stunned and continued to think, "It's so easy." When Othella counted to 10,000, she opened her eyes and breathed a sigh of relief. The shadow field now covered almost half of the training ground, causing everyone to exclaim in admiration. Just using the counting technique, the spiritual domain has increased fourfold. Othella stood on the platform, looking down at the students who were gaping in amazement, and said, "Did you all see? If Kodadama magic reflects and sets the scene, then counting technique uses thought and reflection." She added, "The faster you count, the stronger the spiritual domain becomes. Not only does the size expand, but the power is also enhanced. The accuracy and accuracy rate increase." A spiral of numbers swirled down from the top, and she continued, "All of your skills will be enhanced." Shirone was stunned, thinking to herself, "Amazing. By learning this technique, I can create photons." Othella's voice still echoed, "Of course, counting technique is not omnipotent." Othella smiled, her voice cheerful, "Because the effect of the trigram will decrease if your mental strength is not strong enough. Don't forget, strict discipline and the will to empathize are the basic principles for opening the spiritual realm, understand?" The group said in unison, "Yes!" After a while, everyone dispersed to practice. Shirone stood still, speechless. Then he clenched his fists, nodded, and said to himself with determination, "All right, I counted to 1,000 in 1 minute." But he thought to himself, "Counting silently is harder than I thought. The people around me also can't concentrate when counting for too long, Shirone pondered. If I don't constantly train my mental strength in class, I definitely won't be able to do it. Suddenly, he was startled, as if remembering something. Wait. When I teleported, I used a technique that helps me sense complex calculations. Shirone speculated, maybe that's the JZ. A series of large and small numbers appeared in his mind. He continued to think, sort them into hundreds and count them at once. A ray of light hit the surface, bursting out brightly. Shirone estimated about 10 seconds. He looked serious, held out his palm, and wondered, should I aim at the tree? While reciting phase of light in his mind, his palm suddenly lit up. The golden light swirled into circles, shooting straight towards the tree in the distance, leaving everyone stunned. The phase eye flew towards the tree, and the students shouted in surprise. Huh? What is that? What is that light? The students behind Shirone widened their eyes and opened their mouths. Shirone was also startled, holding his position, and exclaimed inwardly, so dazzling. Shirone stood still, thinking to himself, it's so flashy. Looking down from above at the vast training ground, he stood stock still, surrounded by groups of students turning their heads to look. A buzz of chatter rang out. Isn't that particle emission? Huh? Did he learn that for the speed test? Since it's light, the speed is really fast. Another student spoke up hesitantly, but learning that just for a test is a bit too much, right? Another voice replied, that's right. It doesn't do any damage. Athela, who was standing outside the field, accidentally turned her head, seeing Shirone cast particle emission. She was stunned, thinking to herself, huh? Shirone, who specializes in defense, has now learned active magic? Then she stepped forward shouting, Shirone, looks like you've succeeded with the self-healing technique. Shirone turned his head, looked at Athela in surprise, then turned away awkwardly and replied, yes, maybe so. Athela smiled brightly and said, then do you want to try practicing in the shadow realm? Everyone immediately gathered towards the shadow realm, where a figure was standing in the middle. The chatter was lively. Oh, practicing speed shooting right away. I'm so curious. Athela stood behind the table, looked at Shirone, and instructed. After completing the ZZ, summon the target, Shirone turned his head and replied, yes. He closed his eyes. Concentrating his thoughts. First, use the ZZ to strengthen the spirit realm. The large and small numbers in his head gradually gathered into a large point of light, then separated into many smaller points of light, converging on his body. Shirone stood up straight and snapped his fingers. The shadow realm immediately activated, surrounding him in a brilliant light. Shirone thought to himself, summoning the target. Immediately, a series of green shadows appeared around him. On the blackboard, the information appeared, rapid shooting, level 01, score 00, time limit 1 minute. Shirone's eyes reflected the dazzling green light from the targets. He frowned, opened his eyes wide, and stared at the targets floating in front of him. Then he raised his hand, focusing his spirit field on one point. His palm pointed straight at the target in the air. Shirone muttered in his mind, particle light emission. Immediately, a bright beam of light burst out, rushing straight towards the target. Shirone was stunned and exclaimed in his mind, that's it. He continued thinking, thanks to the bullet speed being close to light, the particle light emission only needs one move to automatically find and attack the target. The particle emission beam shattered the targets, shattering them into pieces. Shirone thought to herself, it feels like I'm aiming and shooting at the same time. On the board, the information was updated. Rapid shooting, level 02, score 11, time limit 0 minutes and 55 seconds. The surrounding students were shocked, exclaiming, that was fast. Everyone gasped, dumbfounded. A voice rang out. As soon as he aimed, he hit the target. It was as if the magic was activated instantly. Athela stood there, quietly observing, thinking to herself, I see. Shirone's particle emission is to gather numbers into a large combination, then deploy them, she concluded. This is a modularization technique previously used in intellectual magic. Above Shirone's head, the particle emission attacks attacked the targets, exploding brilliantly, looking like fireworks in the sky. The magic circle under Shirone's feet shone, spreading across the training ground. Athela watched, thinking to herself, perhaps this is the knowledge he gained from the insurmountable bridge. She exclaimed, what an incredible growth rate. Shirone, meanwhile, continued to focus on attacking the targets. Each of his particle emissions hit their mark, shattering the targets. Finally, the practice session in the Shadow Realm ended. Shirone stood there, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, not paying attention to the information board on the wall. Time's up, level 19, score 342, time limit 0 minutes. The crowd below roared endlessly, discussing, isn't that a perfect score? Taking down 342 targets in 1 minute. A voice rang out, filled with admiration. Should I switch to particle emissions as well? Another student chimed in, you better not. Only if you're as knowledgeable as Shirone can you do that. Shirone, wiping his sweat, breathed a sigh of relief, thinking to himself, with this move, I don't have to worry about the speed test anymore. Nade, who had been observing from the sidelines since the beginning, crossed his arms and spoke up. Up until now, he had never succeeded with active magic. But as soon as he got it, he scored 342 points. How impressive. Eruki, who was sitting next to him, added, that's quite a score. Nade quickly replied somewhat hastily. What? But it was his first time. That's not bad. Eruki sat up, looked at Nade, and grinned. His score is indeed quite impressive, but it's also interesting. Eruki suddenly stood up, raised his hand, and called out, Professor, I want to try too. Ethella and Nade were startled. She was worried and spoke up. Eruki, are you sure? Ethella frowned, worriedly reminding Eruki, are you sure? But don't cause any trouble, understand. Shirone, who was wiping his face, was startled when he heard a voice. Huh, Eruki? He wants to practice too? He puffed his cheeks, turned his face away, thinking, Eruki. I don't like his way of thinking. But then he hesitated, saying to himself, even so, I'm still curious. Eruki walked out onto the stage, looking confident and bold. Everyone gathered around, watching intently. He took his hands out of his pockets, stood up straight, and smiled. The shadow field immediately surrounded him, and the spirit field erupted from beneath his feet, soaring into the sky. Eruki's expression was triumphant. The crowd was stunned, whispering, speed? Shooting with a redirection form? Impossible. Speed? Shooting is completely different. Shirone was shocked, his eyes wide open. A voice rang out, so he plans to take down the target just by looking, without using synesthesia. The floating targets appeared, surrounding Eruki. Under his feet, a giant circle of magic was glowing. Eruki lowered his head and snapped his fingers. His spirit field rushed straight towards the target. Shirone frowned, thinking, the target size has also shrunk. How is he going to do it? Suddenly, his eyes widened, and he softly said, this. Eruki's spirit field curved into a Z shape, piercing through the center of the targets in the sky, to everyone's astonishment. Immediately, the targets exploded simultaneously, shining like fireworks. The crowd gasped in admiration. Unbelievable. The information on the board read, rapid shooting, level 02, score 13, time limit 0 minutes and 57 seconds. Eruki's spirit field continued to twist, piercing the hearts of the targets, causing them to explode in the sky. Shirone was stunned, his head looking at the brilliant explosions, thinking to himself, no need to watch anymore. He will easily surpass my score. He had a serious face, silently thinking. Eruki, standing on the platform, glanced down at Shirone, curled his lips, and said to himself, it's not good to be surprised at just this, Shirone. Then he raised his hand straight forward, controlling the spirit field to pierce through the targets at an even faster speed. The spirit field transformed into many complex shapes, causing the targets to explode one after another. The crowd was amazed, saying in unison, amazing, the speed has increased. Has Eruki always been this strong? A student exclaimed in surprise. Shirone stood behind him, eyes looking up, hand covering his mouth, expression shocked. He began to reason, his eyes sharp. Shirone thought to himself, I see. If you look closely, Eruki doesn't chase after the target with his naked eyes. He predicts their paths using the equations of motion. He looked up at the way Eruki controlled the spirit realm and continued to think. Each target is divided into separate equations by him. Shirone was surprised, wondering, but unexpectedly, after predicting the movement, he still caught up with all the targets using the form of turning. He raised his hand to his chin, muttering, why is his spirit realm so fast? Is it also a track Tuesday? Nade stepped closer, smirked, and replied, yes, but Eruki doesn't just expand hundreds or thousands of numbers. Shirone was surprised and asked, so he calculates numbers higher than thousands? Nade looked at Shirone, grinned, and said curtly, millions. Shirone heard this, his face showing disbelief. The board on the wall showed time is up, level 24, score, 548, time limit, 0 minutes. The crowd cheered at Eruki's achievement. What? Eruki, that's amazing. Eruki laughed triumphantly, one hand on his hip, the other raised high, looking strange but full of confidence. Everyone continued to shout, why are you hiding your skills? It's hard to hit a tiny target with the redirection form. Is he even human? Ethella stood to the side, watching Eruki walk past, thinking to herself, her face slightly bewildered. Amazing, very skillful. Eruki walked to the edge of the stage, standing in front of Shirone, who was watching him warily. Eruki spoke up, how do you like it? Then he smirked, continuing, was it worth watching? Shirone looked up, replying, "Amazing. I didn't expect you to be able to use the redirection form like that." Eruki put his hands in his pockets, smiled arrogantly, looked at Shirone, and said proudly, "That's it? I'm a little disappointed." Shirone was surprised. "What?" Eruki continued, "I'm really impressed that you thought of modularization." Shirone paled when he heard that. Eruki looked at him seriously, asked, "Are you curious about how I calculate millions of numbers?" Shirone tensed up, looked at Eruki cautiously. "I am, but is it okay to tell me it seems like you consider me your rival?" Everyone around was curious, attentively following the conversation. Eruki, standing on the podium, replied arrogantly, "It doesn't matter. Even if you know, you might not be able to do it." Shirone was speechless, not answering. The crowd murmured, "What the hell is going on?" Eruki's voice rang out, nonchalant, "It's nothing." Then he raised his hand to scratch the back of his neck. His eyes glanced away and continued. Eruki curled his lips. "I used logic and omitted the units." Shirone was shocked, his mouth wide open, thinking, impossible. How could he consider that a feasible method? The surrounding crowd heard it and simultaneously opened their mouths wide, exclaiming, What, isn't that too crazy?" Shirone frowned, thinking, if you calculate using logic, the numbers will feel much bigger. Even if you use the simplified method, the calculations are still extremely complicated. He firmly concluded, this is the Savant Syndrome. Eruki raised his index finger to his nose, frowned, and asked, "What do you think? Can you defeat me?" Shirone shouted, his voice firm, "I have no intention of defeating anyone. This is just a test." Eruki covered his nose, looked away, and coldly replied, "A trivial statement of a weakling. Well, remember this." Eruki's face was solemn, his voice cold. "If you don't have the skills, then give up your ideals and continue to pretend to be the best." Then he looked at Shirone, his voice contemptuous. "Your words are not convincing at all." Shirone was angry, gritting his teeth. "If I defeat you, that will prove me right, right?" Eruki snapped his fingers, revealing a mysterious smile. "Of course, but you should know, no matter how high your knowledge is." He paused, then continued. "Compared to me, you are just like an insect." Shirone was indignant, shouting, "An insect! An insect!" Everyone was stunned, including Nade, thinking, this. But then he cheered up, rummaging through something in his paper bag, muttering, "How interesting." Nade turned to Shirone, explaining, "Rules of the shooting test. Points are calculated based on the number of targets hit within the allotted time." Shirone stood in the crowd, staring at the speed test results board, thinking to himself, Level 1, 0 points, 1 minute time limit. As the level increases, the number of targets also increases. Stage 1, 10 targets. Stage 2, 11. Stage 3, 12. Stage 4, 13. Stage 5, 14. If you miss even one target, you won't be able to move on to the next stage. He frowned, continuing to ponder. The higher the level, the faster the target speed. If you don't control the spirit domain in time, the student will run out of time. If you don't handle it quickly, you won't be able to summon more targets and your score will drop dramatically. Shirone's eyes swept across the results board. He propped his chin up, muttering, "The average score of Class 5 is 400. No one has ever scored above 700. He reasoned, "To get 700 points, I can't miss any targets, and I have to reach level 30 in 1 minute." Shirone stood in the middle of the platform. Everyone's eyes were on him. "To achieve that, I have to pass a level every 5 seconds. He looked serious, raised his head, and raised his right hand to the sky. Immediately, the targets were hit one after another with a loud bang. The students below craned their necks in amazement. One of his friends exclaimed in admiration, "Awesome, so awesome." Shirone turned around, attacked, his eyes shining with determination and sharpness. He waved his hand, directing the spirit field towards the targets in front of him. They exploded, shining brightly on the ceiling. The 2 students who had talked to Shirone before now stood there, stunned. The one in front said sternly, "Shirone is no joke. He doesn't even need to teleport. He still hits the target." The one behind him was skeptical, muttering, "How did he do that?" The blackboard on the wall displayed a message. "Time's up, level 25, score, 567, time limit, 0 minutes. A voice of admiration rang out. "In just 1 week, his score has increased by 200 points. The shadow disappeared. Shirone stood there, massaging his left wrist, breathing a sigh of relief, as if all his fatigue had been released amidst the cheers of everyone. He turned and walked away. In the distance, 2 students whispered, "His shooting speed is really fast. He never misses a shot when aiming." The boy beside him softly replied, "His continuous shooting has also improved a lot. In 1 second, I think he shot 4 bullets." Shirone, wiping his sweat with a towel, glanced back and breathed a sigh of relief. He thought to himself, "See, Eruki, I've caught up to your score. Shirone glanced at Eruki, who was smirking, and leisurely stood up. Eruki walked past him, his hands in his pockets, his voice relaxed. Is it my turn? Shirone watched anxiously, his eyes glued to the podium, his heart pounding. Everyone around also turned their eyes to Eruki, waiting anxiously. And as usual, Eruki skillfully controlled the spirit field, gliding like a storm, destroying the targets, causing them to explode simultaneously. A voice suddenly rang out, his spirit field is smaller than before. Eruki's spirit field flashed past everyone's heads, dizzyingly fast. Everyone was surprised, watching attentively. That person continued, even faster. The spirit field curved, piercing through the targets, causing them to explode brilliantly. After a while, Eruki finished. He raised his hand, signaling the gun to shoot into the sky, triumphantly shouting, done! The board on the wall showed, time's up, level 25, score, 568, time limit, 0 minutes. Eruki didn't even bother to look, turned around and walked away. The crowd was in an uproar. Eruki's score has also increased, but it's only 1 point more than Shirone. The chatter gradually faded. Shirone was close, but he lost. Even so, Shirone's score has increased exponentially. He will definitely catch up soon. Shirone stood there, bewildered, watching Eruki's back, thinking, a difference of 1 point. It's not a coincidence. The next day, their scores were still only 1 point different. Shirone 571, Eruki 572. The day after that, 585 and 586, still 1 point apart. The day after that, 593 and 594, still 1 point apart. Eruki stood with his back turned, raised his right hand, glanced back, and smiled proudly. The other students cheered, Eruki, Eruki, but Shirone knew that the difference of 1 point was too obvious. He stood still in the crowd, staring at the podium, thinking to himself, to be 1 point ahead of me, you must have planned everything carefully since elementary school. Shirone frowned, stared straight ahead, and whispered, that's what it means.